I thought I knew what betrayal looked like until I saw my fiancée in my best friend's arms the night before our wedding. For 3 years, Audrey had been my everything, my muse, my future, my safe harbor. Caleb had been my brother in all but blood since music school. Together, they taught me the cruelest lesson about trust one never wanted to learn. I spent 14 months on tour, chasing my dreams while leaving her in his protective hands. What a fool I was. Now I'm standing in the shadows of my own rehearsal dinner, watching their secret unfold, and feeling my world collapse with each whispered word between them. They haven't seen me yet. They have no idea I know. And they certainly don't expect what I'm about to do next. Life has a funny way of making you believe in things that aren't real. Trust, loyalty, forever. These are just words people throw around until they don't mean anything anymore. If someone had told me 3 years ago that I'd be sitting alone in a hotel room that was supposed to be my honeymoon suite, I would have laughed in their face. But here I am, nursing a glass of whiskey, wondering where it all went wrong. My name is Owen Hayes. I'm 34, and I'm a session musician who's played guitar for some decent names in the industry. Nothing that would make me famous, but enough to pay the bills, and then some. I wasn't looking for love when I met Audrey at my buddy's wedding. Hell, I'd sworn off relationships after my last disaster ended with my ex taking half my vinyl collection. The good half, naturally. It was one of those perfect June evenings. I was playing with my band at Mike's wedding, and during our break, I spotted her by the bar. Audrey Kennedy, with her dark hair falling in waves down her back and a laugh that seemed to light up the whole damn reception hall. She was the wedding planner, rushing around making sure everything was perfect, but somehow still looking like she was having the time of her life. "You guys sound amazing," she said when I approached the bar next to her. That rendition of Can't Help Falling in Love nearly made me cry, and I've heard every wedding band in 3 states. Our conversation flowed like we'd known each other for years. She understood the musician's life, the late nights, the hustle for gigs. I found myself telling her things I didn't usually share with people I'd just met. My dreams of writing my own music, my fear of ending up a washed-up guitarist playing covers in dive bars. When the reception ended, I helped her pack up some decorations, and we ended up sitting on the venue steps until sunrise, just talking. By the time I asked for her number, I knew I was in trouble. The good kind of trouble that makes your heart race and your palms sweat like a teenager's. I didn't know then that my best friend Caleb Walsh was watching us from across the parking lot. Caleb and I went way back to music school, and he'd been the one who got me most of my gigs through his industry connections. He claimed he was happy for me when I told him about Audrey the next day. But looking back, there was something in his eyes I should have paid more attention to. That night changed everything for me. One moment, one meeting, and my life took a turn I never expected. Sometimes I wonder if there were signs I missed, warnings I ignored because I was too caught up in the way Audrey made me feel. Maybe if I'd been paying closer attention, I could have seen what was coming. But that's the thing about betrayal. It's always clearest in hindsight. After that first night, Audrey and I became inseparable. We fell into each other's lives like we'd always been there. No awkward phase, just a natural rhythm between us. For a guy who made his living finding the right tempo, it felt like I'd finally found mine. Our second date was at a hole-in-the-wall jazz club where my friend's band was playing. I watched Audrey's face as she took in the music, her eyes closed, fingers tapping along with the beat. She got it. She understood why music mattered to me. "I've never met anyone who listens like you do," she told me later that night as we walked through the city streets. Not just to music, but to people. Within weeks, she was coming to my gigs, sitting in the back with this proud smile that made me play better than I ever had. I started leaving a toothbrush at her place, then clothes, then my favorite guitar. Before I knew it, half my life had migrated to her apartment. About a month in, I introduced her to Caleb. We met at our usual bar, and I was nervous as hell. Caleb had never really liked any of my previous girlfriends. But he and Audrey hit it off immediately, talking about obscure bands and arguing good-naturedly about whether vinyl really sounded better than digital. "She's different from your usual type," Caleb said when Audrey went to the bathroom. "She's got depth. Don't screw this up, Hayes." What I didn't notice then was how his eyes followed her across the room, or how he offered to help her carry drinks back to our table. The signs of attraction were there from the beginning, but I was too caught up in my own feelings to see them. Our relationship moved fast, but it felt right. Audrey became not just my girlfriend, but my best friend, my confidant, my biggest supporter. When I was offered a touring gig that would take me away for 3 months, she was the one who pushed me to take it. "This is your dream," she said. "We'll make it work." And we did. Video calls every night, long text messages, song snippets I'd send her from the road. What I didn't know was that while I was gone, Caleb had been checking in on her for me, getting coffee with her, helping her when her car broke down, building a connection I'd unwittingly facilitated. Trust issues? I never had them. Not until I learned the hard way that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones you should watch most carefully. 1 year into our relationship, I was offered the opportunity of a lifetime. A year-long tour with a rising country star. Great money, exposure to industry bigwigs, chances to play my original material during warm-ups. The catch? I'd be on the road for months at a time. A real relationship crisis in the making. "I don't know if we can survive this," I admitted to Audrey over dinner. The fear of infidelity lingered unspoken between us. Long-distance relationships were breeding grounds for cheating wives and unfaithful partners. I'd seen it happen to too many musician friends. Audrey surprised me by taking my hand across the table. "Owen, this is your shot. I'm not going to be the woman who holds you back. But what about us? What about trust issues? A year is a long time. We'll make it work," she insisted. "I love you. Distance doesn't change that." Her unwavering support made me love her even more, but it also terrified me. I'd be leaving her alone in a city where she knew few people. What kind of boyfriend is that? When I shared my concerns with Caleb over beers, he immediately offered to look out for her. "I'll make sure she's not lonely, man. We're practically family now anyway." I felt a wave of gratitude. My best friend, always having my back. "You're a lifesaver, bro. Just, make sure she doesn't meet some local musician who doesn't have to leave town." I joked, masking my genuine fear of being replaced. "Hey, no one's replacing you," Caleb assured me, clapping my shoulder. "Audrey's crazy about you. Anyone can see that." The night before I left, Audrey and I had a serious talk about expectations and communication during my absence. We promised complete honesty, daily calls when possible, and no emotional affairs with others. Classic relationship advice for long-distance couples. "I trust you completely," I told her as we lay in bed, her head on my chest. "That's never been our problem." "Same here. Just promise you won't fall for some groupie," she teased, but I heard the vulnerability beneath her joke. "There's only you, Audrey. Always." As my tour bus pulled away, I watched her standing in our driveway, waving until I couldn't see her anymore. The image of her alone haunted me for miles. I didn't know then that the greatest threat to our relationship wasn't some anonymous groupie or the distance between us. It was the trusted friend I'd asked to keep her company. The same friend who started texting me less and less as the weeks went by, always with excuses about being busy. The friend who was slowly stepping into the role I'd left vacant in my absence, positioning himself perfectly for betrayal. Life on tour was everything I dreamed of professionally, but a nightmare for my relationship. Spotty cell service, exhausting schedules, and the constant grind of new cities made maintaining connection with Audrey harder than I'd anticipated. Some nights I'd call and hear the sounds of laughter in the background, voices cutting out as she moved to a quieter spot. "Sorry, Caleb brought over dinner and some friends," she'd explain. "You were saying?" These interactions planted seeds of doubt, not about Audrey's faithfulness. I trusted her completely, but about what I was missing. While I was living out a suitcase, she was building a life back home, one that increasingly involved Caleb. "He's been amazing," Audrey told me during one of our calls. "Fixed my leaky bathroom sink yesterday and wouldn't even let me pay him." "That's Caleb for you," I replied, ignoring the twinge of jealousy. Not jealousy of infidelity, but of presence. He was there, I wasn't. 4 months into the tour, I got a week off and flew home, desperate to reconnect. Audrey met me at the airport, running into my arms like a scene from a movie. That night, our physical reunion was passionate, intense, both of us wordlessly addressing the fears of distance and separation. The next day, I suggested we have friends over for a small gathering, including Caleb, of course. I added, wanting to thank him personally for looking after Audrey. A strange expression flickered across her face. "Actually, he's got plans already, but we can try for the weekend." When Caleb finally came over 2 days later, something fell off. The easy friendship between us had developed an undercurrent of tension. He wouldn't meet my eyes for long and kept checking his phone. Audrey seemed overly bright, filling every silence with chatter. After he left, I casually asked, "Is everything okay with Caleb?" He seemed different. "He's probably just busy with work," Audrey said quickly. "He mentioned a big project." I nodded, but a nagging feeling persisted. That night, I woke to find Audrey texting in the dark, the blue light illuminating her face. When she noticed me watching, she put the phone down with a guilty start. "Just checking work emails," she explained, though I hadn't asked. My flight back to the tour left the next morning. At the airport, Audrey hugged me fiercely. "I miss you so much when you're gone," she whispered. "I miss you too," I said, not voicing my growing fears about relationship problems or the emotional distance I'd sensed. Only 8 more months. As I boarded the plane, a notification lit up my phone. An Instagram post from Caleb, a picture of him and Audrey at a concert I didn't know they'd attended. Her smile in the photo haunted me for the entire flight back to the tour. The tour finally ended after 14 grueling months, 2 months longer than originally planned. I returned home with calloused fingers, industry connections, and a diamond ring burning a hole in my pocket. Despite the distance and occasional doubts, I knew Audrey was the woman I wanted to spend my life with. Our relationship had survived the ultimate test of separation, or so I thought. When I walked through our front door, guitar case in hand, Audrey launched herself into my arms. The weeks of uncertainty melted away in her embrace. That night, as we reacquainted ourselves with each other's bodies, I pushed away all thoughts of the changes I'd noticed in her social media. The increasing presence of Caleb, the inside jokes I wasn't part of, the subtle shift in our phone conversations. "I'm never leaving again," I promised her, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder as she nestled against me. "At least not for that long." "Good," she murmured sleepily. "The apartment feels wrong without your guitar picks scattered everywhere." The next morning, I called Caleb to thank him personally for being there for Audrey during my absence. His response was oddly formal, almost rehearsed. "That's what friends do, man. No big deal." There was a strained quality to his voice I couldn't place. "Let's grab a beer tonight," I suggested. "Catch up properly." "Can't tonight. Work stuff. But soon, definitely." I hung up feeling unsettled, but pushed it aside to focus on my proposal plan. I'd arranged for us to revisit the jazz club where we'd had our second date, the owner a friend who was happy to help orchestrate the moment. That evening, as we sat at our table, the band suddenly played the song I'd written for Audrey during the tour. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Is that?" Before she could finish, the singer announced, "This next song is from Owen, who's finally back home where he belongs." I took her hand and led her to a small space near the stage. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dropped to one knee, pulling out the ring I'd chosen months ago. "Audrey Kennedy, you've been my melody through the loudest and quietest moments of the past 2 years. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks as she nodded, whispering, "Yes, of course, yes." The club erupted in applause as I slid the ring onto her finger, a vintage sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, not flashy but uniquely her. Later that night, as Audrey slept beside me, her left hand resting on my chest, the ring catching moonlight, I checked my phone to find dozens of congratulatory messages. Friends and family were thrilled, having kept my proposal plan secret for weeks. Caleb's message came through last. "Congrats, brother. Hope she makes you happy." The words seemed right, but something felt off. No exclamation points, no jokes about me being tied down, none of Caleb's usual enthusiasm. Just a formal acknowledgement that seemed to be checking a box of friendship rather than celebrating a milestone. I wondered briefly if he was having personal problems I didn't know about. Maybe relationship issues of his own. I made a mental note to reach out again, to make sure he was okay. After all, that's what best friends do. They look out for each other, support each other through life's challenges, remain loyal when trust issues threaten to divide them. As I drifted off to sleep beside my fiancée, I had no idea that the greatest betrayal was yet to come, that the foundation of my happiness was built on shifting sand, that infidelity had already taken root in ways I couldn't imagine. My best friend's strange behavior wasn't about his problems. It was about ours. Planning a wedding while trying to establish myself as a songwriter proved challenging. After the tour, I decided to focus on creating my own music rather than backing other artists. Audrey supported this decision completely, even when it meant tighter finances as I transitioned between steady gigs. "We don't need a fancy wedding," she insisted as we reviewed our budget one evening. "Just something meaningful with the people we love." We settled on a small ceremony at a rustic venue outside the city, a renovated barn with twinkling lights and exposed beams that wouldn't break the bank, but still had the romantic atmosphere Audrey deserved. The date was set for 6 months after the proposal, giving us time to save while planning. I asked Caleb to be my best man, of course. He accepted with a stiff smile that didn't match the significance of the request. When I mentioned it to Audrey later, she brushed it off. "He's probably just stressed about the responsibility. You know how Caleb gets about commitments." As wedding preparations intensified, I noticed Audrey increasingly turn to Caleb for help with logistics. His experience organizing music events made him valuable for vendor negotiations and timeline planning. I was grateful, especially since I was knee-deep in recording sessions, trying to complete an EP before the wedding. Caleb found us an amazing photographer for half what we budgeted, Audrey announced one day, scrolling through a portfolio on her phone. "And he convinced the venue to throw in extra hours at no charge." "That's great," I said, ignoring the twinge of inadequacy. "Remind me to thank him." "You can thank him tonight. He's coming over to help me finalize the seating chart while you're at your session." These evening planning sessions became more frequent, Caleb stepping in while I was working. Sometimes I'd return home to find them huddled over wedding details at our dining table, wine glasses in hand, laughing about inside jokes I wasn't part of. They'd quickly include me, but the momentary exclusion stung each time. 3 months before the wedding, we held an engagement party at our favorite local bar. As friends toasted our future, I watched Caleb across the room, his eyes following Audrey as she mingled with guests. There was an intensity in his gaze that sent a chill through me. Not just admiration or friendship, but something possessive, something covetous. Later that night, I overheard a fragment of conversation between them in the hallway outside the bathrooms. "We need to be more careful," Caleb murmured, his voice barely audible over the party noise. "He's starting to notice." Audrey's response was lost as someone turned up the music, but I saw her place a hand briefly on Caleb's chest before they separated, returning to the party from different directions. My stomach churned with anxiety. Notice what exactly? Was there something going on, or was I paranoid from reading too many stories of infidelity and betrayal? When we got home, I almost confronted Audrey but stopped myself. What would I accuse her of? Being friendly with my best friend? Accepting his help with our wedding? Without concrete evidence, bringing up my suspicions would only create marriage problems before we even said our vows. Instead, I channeled my unease into a song, a ballad about trust and uncertainty that became the most honest piece on my EP. Audrey loved it, oblivious to the fact that it was born from my fear of losing her. "This is going to be your breakthrough," she said after hearing the final mix, kissing me proudly. "I've always believed in your music." Her sincerity confused me further. How could she be so genuinely supportive if she was hiding something? Was I manufacturing drama where none existed? 2 months before the wedding, Caleb offered to organize my bachelor party. "Nothing crazy," he promised. "Just a night with the guys before you take the plunge." The way he said plunge, like marriage was a mistake he was helping me make, rubbed me wrong. But I agreed, not wanting to create tension when he'd been so helpful with wedding arrangements. What I didn't know then was that the bachelor party would be the least of my concerns. The true test of loyalty was still coming, and it would arrive not from some wild night out, but in the quiet betrayal happening right under my nose, orchestrated by the 2 people I trusted most in the world. The month before our wedding, red flags started popping up faster than I could ignore them. Audrey began guarding her phone like it contained nuclear launch codes, turning it face down whenever I entered the room. Our once-open policy of knowing each other's passwords mysteriously evaporated when she changed hers for security reasons. My buddy Marcus, who played drums in my band, pulled me aside after rehearsal one night. "Listen, man, I might want to stir the pot, but I saw something that's been eating me alive." My stomach dropped like a stone. "Spit it out." "I saw Audrey and Caleb at the basement last Tuesday. You know, when you were recording vocals for that new track." He shifted uncomfortably. "They looked cozy, real cozy, holding hands under the table cozy." I wanted to tell him he was full of it, but Marcus wasn't the type to make mountains out of molehills. If he said something was fishy, something was probably rotting in Denmark. You sure it wasn't just friendly? They've gotten close planning the wedding. Marcus gave me a look that screamed, "Wake up and smell the coffee." Owen, buddy, I wouldn't be saying this if I wasn't dead certain. The way they were looking at each other. It wasn't wedding planning. That night, I couldn't sleep, my mind running a highlight reel of suspicious moments I'd brushed off. The whispered phone calls. The accidental touches I'd noticed between them. The way Caleb always seemed to know Audrey's schedule better than I did. When I casually mentioned to Audrey that Marcus had seen her at the basement, she didn't miss a beat. Yeah, Caleb and I were finalizing the music playlist for the reception. I told you about that. She hadn't, but I nodded anyway, watching her face for tells. Nothing. Wanting to show you what we came up with, she offered, pulling out a perfectly organized spreadsheet. I felt like a jerk for doubting her. Maybe Marcus had misinterpreted. Maybe I was making something out of nothing. A week before the rehearsal dinner, Caleb asked to meet for a beer, just us guys. I agreed, hoping to clear the air, maybe even confess my stupid suspicions so we could laugh about them. He was already halfway through his second pint when I arrived, looking like he'd been ridden hard and put away wet. "You okay, man? You look like hell warmed over." "Just work stress," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. "Listen, I've been meaning to ask. Are you sure about this wedding? Marriage is a big step. No shame in pumping the brakes if you're having second thoughts." The question blindsided me. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Something flashed across his face. Disappointment? Guilt? Before he masked it with a forced smile. "Good. That's good. As long as you're happy." He changed the subject abruptly, but the damage was done. Why would my best man, 1 month before my wedding, be checking to see if I had cold feet? Unless, of course, he was hoping I did. The rehearsal dinner should have been a time for celebration. Instead, I felt like I was watching a slow-motion train wreck while being strapped to the tracks. We'd chosen a rustic Italian restaurant with string lights and a cozy private room for our 30 closest friends and family members. Everyone was dressed to the nines, clinking glasses and sharing stories about Audrey and me. On the surface, everything was picture perfect. My mom hugged Audrey like the daughter she'd always wanted. Audrey's father clapped me on the back, saying I was a chip off the old block despite having known me all of 3 years. But underneath the happy facade, I felt a current of tension strong enough to power a small city. Caleb showed up late, looking like he'd been through the ringer, dark circles under his eyes, and his usual styled hair a mess. He gave a best man toast that checked all the boxes but lacked his usual charisma. The words were right, but the delivery was mechanical. To Owen and Audrey, he concluded, raising his glass with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. "May your love be as enduring as your friendship." Something about the way he emphasized friendship made my skin crawl. During dinner, I noticed Audrey kept disappearing, to the bathroom, to speak with the waitstaff, to make a quick call. Each time, Caleb would mysteriously vanish shortly after, returning just before she did. Classic cheating wife behavior straight out of a relationship advice column. When my cousin asked Audrey about their honeymoon plans, she stammered and looked to me to answer. It was odd. She had planned the entire trip, researched every detail. Why suddenly play dumb? "Cat got your tongue?" I asked lightly, trying to mask my discomfort with humor. Her smile was brittle. "Just wedding brain, I guess." As the evening wound down, I stepped outside for some fresh air, feeling like I was suffocating under the weight of my suspicions. The cool night breeze was a welcome relief from the stuffy room and forced smiles. I was about to head back inside when I heard voices around the corner of the building. Audrey's voice, speaking in a hushed, urgent tone I rarely heard. "We can't do this anymore. After tomorrow." "I know," Caleb interrupted. "But I can't just turn off my feelings like a faucet, Audrey. This is killing me." "It's killing me too. But I made my choice." "Did you? Or did you just take the path of least resistance?" I stood frozen, wanting to storm around the corner and confront them, yet needing to hear more. Part of me still hoped for an innocent explanation, some wedding surprise they were planning. "I love him," Audrey insisted, her voice breaking. "You know I do." "Not the way you love me," Caleb responded, his voice so confident it made my blood boil. "Not the way we—" I'd heard enough. I stepped around the corner, my hands shaking with rage and betrayal. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers, Audrey's eyes wide with shock, Caleb's face draining of color. "Owen, Audrey's voice was strangled. This isn't. Save it. I cut her off, my voice deadly calm despite the hurricane raging inside me. I'm not as stupid as you both clearly think I am. Bro, let me explain. Caleb started, taking a step toward me. I'm not your bro. I spat. Brothers don't stab each other in the back. Audrey was crying now, mascara tracking down her cheeks. Please, Owen, let's go somewhere private. We could talk about this. Talk about what? How long you've been lying to my face. How many times you've been together behind my back. No thanks, I'll pass. I turned and walked away, ignoring their calls, pushing past concerned guests who'd come looking for the bride and groom. My mind was made up. The wedding was off. No way was I tying the knot with a woman who couldn't even make it to our wedding day without betraying me. Some wounds cut too deep for second chances. I spent the night in a motel on the edge of town, ignoring the barrage of calls and texts blowing up my phone. By morning, I made up my mind. I needed the full truth before I could walk away clean. I texted Audrey. Your place. Noon. We talk once, then I'm gone. She was waiting on the front steps when I arrived, eyes puffy and red. The engagement ring still sparkled on her finger, a cruel reminder of promises already broken. Owen, please, she started as I approached. Save it. I just want to know how long. How long have you been cheating on me with my best friend? She flinched at the directness. It's not that simple. Actually, infidelity is pretty damn simple. You either betrayed me, or you didn't. She stared at her hands. It started during your tour, she admitted quietly. Caleb was there for me. It wasn't planned. They never planned to stab you in the back, I said bitterly. It just happens. We tried to end it when you came home. I swear we did. I love you, Owen. I chose you. I laughed, a hollow sound. You chose me, while still sneaking around with him. That's not a choice, Audrey. That's having your cake, and eating it too. Last night was goodbye, she insisted, tears spilling down her cheeks. We were ending things for good. How noble. Squeezing in one last heart-to-heart before the wedding. I made a terrible mistake, she whispered. But we can work through this. Couples survive affairs all the time. Not this couple. I stood up, suddenly exhausted. I could forgive many things, but not this. Not with him. As if on cue, Caleb's car pulled into the driveway. Perfect timing. Now I could rip the Band-Aid off completely. He approached cautiously, looking between us. Owen, man, let me explain. Explain betraying 10 years of friendship? Go ahead. I'm all ears. I fell in love with her, he said simply. I fought it. We both did. Not hard enough. I spat. I'll regret hurting you for the rest of my life, he said. And the worst part was, I believed him. I looked between them, my fiancé and my best friend, and felt nothing but emptiness where rage had been. I hope you two will be very happy together, I said, turning to leave. Don't invite me to the wedding. 6 months after the wedding that never was, I found myself in Nashville, rebuilding my life one chord at a time. The EP I'd recorded before the breakup had caught the attention of a producer who liked my raw, emotional honesty. Turns out heartbreak is marketable if you can package it right. I'd canceled our honeymoon reservations, but kept the ticket for myself. A week alone in the place we were supposed to start our married life gave me perspective, if not peace. Some days were harder than others, phantom pains from an amputated future. Word on the grapevine was that Audrey and Caleb were officially together now. My mother, still furious on my behalf, had called to report this breaking news, as if I might not have guessed it already. She meant well, but it felt like picking at a scab. I'm fine, Mom, I'd assured her. Ancient history. Not quite true, but getting there. The hardest part wasn't losing Audrey. It was losing trust in my own judgment. I'd been so sure of her, so confident in us. How could I have missed the signs of betrayal brewing right under my nose? My new song about infidelity was climbing the indie charts, a bittersweet victory. Fans connected with the lyrics about trust issues and relationship problems, never knowing they were autobiographical. Sometimes I wondered if Audrey and Caleb ever heard it on the radio and recognized themselves. Tonight's gig at the Bluebird Cafe was packed, faces illuminated by tiny table candles as I took the small stage. I spotted a woman in the back, her attentive expression reminiscent of how Audrey used to watch me play. For a moment, old pain flared, but I pushed through it. This next song is new, I told the crowd. It's called After the Betrayal. As I played, something shifted inside me. Not forgiveness exactly, but acceptance. What happened with Audrey and Caleb would always be part of my story, but it no longer had to be the defining chapter. After the show, the woman from the back approached. "Your music really speaks to anyone who's been through heartbreak," she said. "It's like you've lived it." I smiled ruefully. "I have. But that's the thing about rock bottom. Once you hit it, there's nowhere to go but up." She introduced herself as Vanessa. We talked until the venue closed. Walking home under Nashville's neon lights, I realized I was finally ready to trust again. Cautiously, wisely, but openly. The past couldn't be changed, but the future was still unwritten, and I had new songs to write.